Are we on?
Yeah.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Wrecking Crew Comedy Podcast. You're with Vito D'Amico and
Mark Arts.
And we've got an amazing guest today. I hope I don't screw up his name. Ozzy is here. Not Ozzy, but Ozzy Ozymandias Ramses II. I don't want to call you that. I thought if we could call you Marcus Aurelius Prometheus the third.
Oh yeah, that's so much easier.
Or we just call you Caligula Oz. Is that okay? Because that name is just too. It's too long. It's just too hard for somebody with a grade 5 education.
Right. Or you even.
So can we just call you Oz?
You can call me Oz or Ozzy. For those who are listening, my YouTube handle is Ozymandias Ramses II, and I chose that because Ozymandias is the name of a famous poem by the English poet Shelley. It's one of my favorite poems, and I've been using that handle for years on IRC in discussions of the Great Debate. And when I started a YouTube channel and a Google Plus account, I had to choose something, and you needed a first and last name. And Ozymandias is the throne name of the pharaoh Ramses II.
Oh, nice.
So I went with Ozymandias Ramses II because Ozymandias was taken, but everyone just calls me Oz or Ozzy.
Yeah, good, because I couldn't fuck up that intro any more than.
He's sweating.
I swear to God,
he's sweating over here.
Jesus, I was like, I couldn't fuck. While I'm reading it, I'm going, I am fucking this up so badly. And for people that know or don't know, Oz is a popular YouTuber in the Great Debate. He's a panelist on several online shows, including the very popular Magic Sandwich Show. He is not an atheist activist, but considers himself an activist for skepticism. Fucking bitches.
What happened?
Critical thinking, and scientific value. I couldn't. Jesus, this. Yeah. Oz, I've talked to Ron Jeremy. You make me more nervous.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually,
I've heard you speak. The words that you use, they're huge and they're smart.
Words like skepticism.
Yes, what did I say? Skittles? Did I say he works? He works with
skepticism.
Oh,
skepticism.
Holy fuck!
Something to do with
what
glasses.
A nightmare! Jesus Christ! This is the worst. This is going to be the worst interview.
He's an ophthalmologist.
Oh Jesus! Wait, fuck! I even know the word and I screwed it up.
We can start over if you want.
No. This is great.
This is gold.
This is start over. Are you kidding me? Did Noah start over?
Probably.
Did God start over? Well,
what's funny is that you're a stand-up comic, and it sounds like you've got stage fright right now.
No, it's not. I hate screwing up people's names. That bugs me the most. And I'm used to names like, hey, Ken Miller or Bobby Cox or Tony Vendetti, and then it's like, okay, here, let's go with Ramses the Third, and I'm like, he's no, you know what I mean? Like he's just like, I know it's not your name, but I still don't want to screw it up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But no.
I think probably you saw that coming when you named yourself that.
No, he's in the community of smart people.
Oh yeah,
that's
the other thing.
All have smart names. I would be known as the piss bucket boy. Oh, piss bucket. Oh, piss bucket.
So you don't consider yourself like an activist or an anti-theist or anything like that. So how do you differ from guys like that?
Oh, well, no, I'm an atheist. That is, I'm of the view that there are no gods. And that's a provisional view. I think probably there are no gods. Some gods I think absolutely don't exist. They're just ridiculous.
Right.
But some gods I think are, well, who the heck knows? They're so vague and rarefied and unfalsifiable that they're not impossibilities, and they don't contradict any known fact because they don't make any predictions. So I guess technically for some gods you could call me an agnostic who inclines towards atheism, but I self-identify as an atheist. But I don't self-identify as an activist for atheism. I don't think that there's much need to agitate for atheism, especially in a Canadian context.
Right.
I think it's important to destigmatize the word atheism and the concept of atheism. But really, I sort of see myself first and foremost as Vito was saying, as an activist who's trying to promote rationality, skepticism, critical thinking, and scientific values. And my view is that to the extent that a person embraces skepticism and critical thinking and improves their critical thinking and embraces scientific values, they're going to move away from superstition, dogmatism, irrationality, fundamentalism, and move in the direction of agnosticism and atheism.
Right.
And what is the difference between, like, do you, we had Aaron Ra, and you debated Aaron Ra, what on, it was a show called The Place, and what is there a big difference between you guys? I thought you guys agreed on the same thing. Is there a difference?
Yeah, it's more of a quibble than anything, though. But there is an important underlying difference. Well, first of all, I should say that Aaron Ra is a celebrated YouTuber.
Yeah.
And debunker of creationism, extraordinaire. I mean, he's fantastic at what he does, and he's of course a proponent and agitator for atheism. Yep. Especially in a context where he is in Texas, where it's actually important to do what he does.
Well, he's
so
one of the.
I'm not critical of anything that he's doing there. Where he and I differ is on a small point. I should also say we share a platform. We're both on the Magic Sandwich Show. We're both regular panelists on the Magic Sandwich Show together, and we've locked horns on this particular bone of contention between us a few times. He favors a definition of atheism that I call lack theism, which is just as he sees it, an atheist is anyone who merely lacks a belief in a god or gods. And it's true that everyone who is an atheist, such as myself, who thinks there are no gods, such as Aaron, who thinks there are no gods, also lacks a belief. I mean, if you think there are no gods, then you lack a belief in any god or gods. So all atheists are lactheists. But there are people out there who lack a belief in a god, who would not ever go so far as to say that they think there are probably no gods. There are agnostics, for instance, who are completely on the fence. You know, one day they think there's a god, the next day they think there isn't. Or they just think that the question is completely unanswerable. There are ichtheists who think the concept of God is incoherent, and one can't get as far as being a theist or an atheist. And then there are people who have never heard of a God. There are cultures in the world where people, like the Praha, people who've never heard of God, have no God concept at all. And then, of course, there are children who, you know, growing up have not been exposed to religion yet in some cultures, and consequently have no concept of God. And so all those people also lack a belief in a God. They are all lack-theists or non-theists. We actually have a word for this broad umbrella of everyone who isn't a theist, and that word is non-theism. I coined the word lack-theism just to emphasize that it's a lack of a belief. But the word atheism has traditionally, in modern languages, for centuries now, in English and French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, has been meant to designate not just people who happen to not have a belief in a god or gods for whatever reason, but people who think that in fact there are no gods, who are of the opinion, who opine that there are no gods. It's the opposite of theism, the negation of theism, the rejection of theism. And so I think that that's that one should go with that traditional definition, not because it's, you know, we should just go with the traditional definition, but that it's a more specific and rigorous definition. If a person says, what's your opinion about the question of the God's existence? And you say, I lack a belief in a God or gods, you haven't answered the question what your position is.
Right.
Are you an agnostic? Are you an atheist? Are you an ichtheist? Are you someone who's never heard of a God or has never thought about it? Right? Are you a houseplant? Like, you're not answering the question. But if you say, I'm an atheist, everyone understands that you think there are no gods. And an atheist isn't someone who knows that there's no God or can prove there's no God. I mean, you can be an atheist for good or bad reasons or no reasons, just like you can be a theist for good or bad reasons or no reasons.
Right.
You're an atheist if you think there's no God, just like you're a theist if you think there is a God. It has nothing to do with your justification or your warrant. And the reason I think this is consequential, the reason it's not just a trivial quibble over the meaning of a word, is that if you self-identify as a lack-theist, you're self-identifying as one of many potential positions, but you're not specifying your position. And consequently, if you're not specifying your position, you haven't stated your position. Nobody knows what your position is. And so you don't bear a burden of justifying what it is what you believe and why you believe it if you haven't stated what your position is, which is kind of comfortable in an argument. A lot of people like that.
Right.
But if a person has asked you what is your position, you owe it to them to tell them honestly what is your position. So Aaron Ra thinks like I do that gods are BS. They're just they're non-existent.
Right.
And he will say things, as I would say, that gods are myths, gods are fantasies, gods are inventions, gods are imaginary, gods are mythical, all of these sorts of things, every one of which implies that reality includes no gods. So that's a positive claim. That's a claim about reality, that it includes no gods, every bit as much as saying the Holocaust didn't happen, or unicorns don't exist, or Bigfoot is a myth. Those are all claims about reality.
Right.
And so if you are making a claim about reality, you have to have a reason why you think that claim is true. And so atheism has a burden of justification. Now, I think it's a very easy burden to discharge, whereas I think theism is a very hard burden to discharge,
Right.
to support. But that's where we differ. And so the reason people like the non-theist or lack-theist definition of atheism is because it allows them to hide among all the other non-believers who don't, in fact, say that there's no gods.
Right.
And avoid the burden of justification. And I think when we play hide the ball that way, we kind of look silly when we want to pretend that we're skeptics and critical thinkers. You can't say that your position is rational if you have no rationale for it.
Right.
Right.
And I think that, of course, atheism is a rational position, and there is a rationale for it. There are reasons for being an atheist, perfectly good, sensible reasons for atheism, and we shouldn't hide from the burden of justification, and we shouldn't say that the theists have a burden of justification, but we atheists don't. We both do. If there are 2 positions or 3 positions or 10 positions in a room arguing, everyone has the burden of justifying their own position.
Of course, there's a few apologists that would disagree with that. They try and flip it back on us every time, but
Yeah, that's where I agree with you, Oz. It's when I watch people like a Slick or who's the other guy? There's
the wingnut.
Yeah, they have a show, the Bible, the
Bible Thumping Wingnut. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm familiar with the show and the podcast. Yeah.
You've been on that?
No, I'm familiar with it. No,
Yeah,
I've never been invited on it. They sometimes hinted that they have, but I have in fact never been on it.
I think they would be.
We have history. I wouldn't want to be on it anyway.
No.
Yeah, good, because I if you think I fucked up your name,
oh God,
they would just
they'd cry and pee their pants.
No, they wouldn't give you a chance to speak, Oz. They would just totally mute your mic, and they don't want to hear. I mean, what you said made total sense, right? You're saying I need proof, pretty much, and just that's you're believing in stuff that there is really no proof to, and all the claims that you're talking about. You could add in fairy tales to them. To there have been gods through history. This is just why people believe. You could reason your way into believing a god, and you're coming up with logical. Logical ways of saying, well, no, that's not really. I mean, if you look at the facts, you look at all the facts of the Bible, there really is no real reason to believe in an invisible man unless he could poof himself in front of me. That's pretty much the only way I could really believe it. And where a Matt Slick will say, well, I've had a conversation with him. Well, that, it's that old saying of, hey, I've got a Ferrari in my garage. Well, I'd like to see that. I need to see it. I need to touch it. So I've always considered myself my favorite person in the Bible is a doubting Thomas. He had to touch it. He had to see it to believe it. And you writing down about Thomas touching it and seeing it, I don't believe it unless it's me. You know what I mean? So, I see what you actually make sense, where the other guys, the apologists, they do this woo-woo thing, use big words, and then all of a sudden go, and how about that?
Yeah.
Well, I think Matt Slick is something of a bamboozler. I think some apologists, are very honest in their apologetics. They try to present what, by their lights, are genuinely good arguments. And then there are some apologists that I think are of the any old argument will do flavor.
Yeah.
and so they will ply an argument out there. They'll just to people because they think that they can bamboozle that person, even if they've heard that argument completely debunked. So
Right.
they're content to use an argument as long as they think it will work on the person they're talking to. And that, of course, is, I think, intellectually dishonest. But,
Yes.
but the point that I was making earlier was that, for the most part, theists. There are a few theists out there who will not try to discharge their burden. Those are called fideists. They believe in that their religion can be justified only by faith, just pure blind faith. They just accept it on faith. They don't pretend to have rational reasons. Fideism is the view that one's faith cannot be justified.
So Santa Claus people.
What's that?
Santa Claus people.
And I guess it makes about as much sense as believing in Santa Claus, because as I view it, fideism is a self-avowed, it's a self-confessed irrational view. Their view is that there is no rational justification, in which case I think they have no.
So they're saying. So you're saying, like
that's like the majority of anybody who's claims to be of faith. I would.
Yeah,
think.
but you're saying that no matter what proof no matter what you tell me, I'm going to believe in a God. No matter, even though you could prove to me that there isn't, I don't care. I'm going to believe it. That's what you mean?
No, that would be a dogmatism.
Okay.
I would distinguish. A dogmatist is someone who says, "Look, no matter what you present to me, I'm never going to change my mind." And you can be a dogmatist on anything, not just about religion. So that kind of closed-mindedness is of course a terrible thing. But fideism is the view that one's position cannot be justified rationally, that one just accepts it on faith. But that's not to say that they couldn't be talked out of it, just that the reason that they have is that they simply have faith.
Right.
So in other words, they're not saying they couldn't be talked out of it, but they're saying that they are confessing, they are admitting that their position is not a rational one, that it requires this leap of faith. Now, I don't think that's a good position. Now, a lot of the average people that you talk to out there who are religionists or theists of one flavor or another, if you ask them why they believe in God, they'll give you some reasons. But if you press them on them and they realize, those aren't very good reasons, they'll say, well, really, at bottom, you just got to have faith. Now, they are, in that moment, confessing fideism. And I think that's a very, very common view. Yeah. Most people don't know it has a name and don't realize it, that is obviously a terrible reason to offer. It's a terrible thing to admit, but at least it's honest. But most apologists think that their faith is defensible, rationally speaking. That's what apologetics is all about. It's about trying to give a rational defense of one's faith. And that, I think, is a good thing. I think it's good. If you're going to be a theist, if you're going to believe in Islam, if you're going to believe in Judaism or Christianity or Druidism or whatever it is you believe, you should have some reasons why you believe it's true. And hopefully they'll be the honest reasons. They're not necessarily the reasons how you came to have the faith. You can come to believe something for terrible reasons and then discover later on that there are good reasons and that your reasons were BS, how you came to it, but that there are, in fact, good reasons, right? We've all found ourselves in that position of, lucking out and believing something that was true, but for terrible reasons, and then finding out that there are good reasons for believing it. So that's fine when that happens, and I think it's commendable when people have a position that I would think is ultimately indefensible. They at least try to defend it, right? Because to the extent that a person is trying to defend it, it means they, at least to that extent, respect rationality. They respect the need for reasons. They understand that belief should be warranted, and that, there's greater hope for those people of them eventually finding their way out of the falsehoods that they believe. Just as if I happen to be mistaken in my views, to the extent that I'm committed to rationality, I could be talked out of my views in principle.
But that's where I get, how you could talk somebody out of their views. Some of the people I see you talk to, they won't, no matter what, which kind of, I don't know if they're, being dishonest or they're not listening.
I had a discussion about this with a friend of mine, and my position was that, if about Islam in particular, if you believe this stuff is true, it's almost more, I don't know if noble is the word, to be fundamental about it.
Well, you're following the book.
If you're
following the teachings.
That's what I mean. If you're going to do it, and you believe it, truly believe it,
Oh, we'd be fucked.
well, yeah, but you, it's almost better. It's almost a more noble or a more respectable position to say, I'm going to do it. This is it, and here's my reasons, whatever they may be, verifiable or not. It's better to be fundamental about it.
Well, you're following the teachings. Like if you, it's like me saying, "Do you follow the Bible?" And you say, "Yeah," and I go, "Well, you don't. It's
Yeah.
Sunday. Well, you should be at church."
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, so you don't follow the Bible. If you watch, there is a video Oz did. It's a great vid called "Do Religious Moderates Provide Cover for Fundamentalism?"
Good job.
Good job, right? Fucking hell. So it's a great vid where you explain what happened with Charlie Hebdo and the people that went out and did the crime that killed. Then Oz got into it with somebody that said, you know what, the people that drew the pictures are just as guilty. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
just because they drew the pictures, you can't, you shouldn't kill them. It's the act was horrible, what you did. But to believe it and not believe your way out of it, you're insane. You're something's not right.
Right.
And what you're saying is, I agree with you. If you're not following the book, then you're not really a
Then what's the
Muslim,
point?
right? You're not really. You're not really, like, I understand you pray 5 times a day or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I'm not justifying, obviously, the horrible stuff.
Well, I
that
call
they
them
did.
wimps. I go,
What's
why aren't you
going on?
blowing yourself up?
Yeah.
Like, you are a wimp.
Skip a step and just
Yeah.
kill yourself.
Yeah, you're being a wimp. You
Yeah.
need to blow. It's like, does that? It terrifies me, Oz, that if you can read a book and if other people came up to you and said, "Hey, Oz, you read the Quran? Yeah, you love it? Yeah. Listen, you need to do the teachings. You need to kill the infidels." Wouldn't you question saying, but if there is a loving God, a loving being, wouldn't he disagree with the way we're doing this?
Well, a couple of things there. I would think that an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator would understand what the sorts of creatures that we are, that he created, and wouldn't expect the bizarre things that he expects, and wouldn't demand the bizarre things that he demands of us.
Right.
I mean, it makes no sense to posit that this creature is necessarily existing, needs and wants for nothing, but craves worship and adulation, and bowing to him and scraping and stuff like that, like the most petty of earthly tyrants. I mean, clearly this attitude of having to bow and scrape and worship endlessly and praise is inspired by ancient ideas and attitudes that people had towards their petty tyrants and kings in antiquity,
Like
mapped onto a god,
Like
right?
pharaohs and stuff, right?
Yeah, like pharaohs and petty kings of ancient Greek and ancient Hebrews and stuff like that, and Roman emperors and stuff like that. I mean, these are people that demanded obeisance. They demanded that people literally bow, that people defer to them constantly, and shower them with praise and stuff like that. And this is just a fear of power and people mapping their attitude towards kings, what was seen as a proper attitude towards a superior. They're mapping that onto some metaphysical being, the creator of the universe as they see it. And he's just a bigger king, a more powerful king, and therefore demands even more bowing and scraping and praise.
Kings.
So I think that concept of a god makes no sense. Such a god would have no need for that.
Right. Like, what would he...
What does God need glory for? I understand why people want and need glory. I don't understand why a being that necessarily exists for all of eternity and cannot be hurt by anything, threatened by nothing, can accomplish anything that it wants whenever it wants, could possibly value being worshipped and praised. It just seems
And don't touch your
bizarre.
wiener, whatever you do.
clip the end of your wee-wee, and it's just like you've seen the G-Man guy, right? The deep.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and
I've
he's
spoken to Jude a few
either
times.
he's just insane or he's playing a game.
I don't think either of those is true. I don't think he's insane, and I don't think he's playing a game. I think he.
You think he believes that?
Yeah, I think he does. For the most part, I try to take people at their word when they say they believe these sorts of things, especially when they invest this much energy into it. I think that it can't just be a game. But the thing is this: if you believe preposterous things,
Right.
if you have right, then your behavior is going to look absurd, right? And so the thing about religion is that religion allows a person to believe the sorts of things which you would otherwise have to be nuts to believe. Right.
Right.
Gotcha.
And it'll lead you to do things which you would otherwise have to be crazy. See, that's the worst thing about religion. A lot of people think that religion is, like, I hear this a lot in the atheist community, and I actually made a video against it. This idea that religion is a mental illness and that you're suffering from a mental
I heard
illness,
about that.
right?
Yeah.
And the reason I think well, there are a number of reasons why I think that's false, but I think that misdiagnoses things in the wrong way. The situation is much worse than that, right? If religion was just a mental illness, then of course it could just be treated. But I don't think religion is a mental illness. I think that people come by the religions, for the most part, rather honestly. I mean, I was religious. I was a fundamentalist growing up. I wasn't mentally ill, and I didn't suddenly get better.
So you
right?
were a Christian at one point.
Yeah, growing up, yeah.
Okay.
And a fundamentalist, and I used to argue for creationism and against evolution and everything with my teachers. I mean, the whole thing. But the situation is a little worse than that because, I mean, the problem with religions is that they valorize faith. They diminish
Right.
the value that we should be placing on rationality and critical thinking and skepticism and scientific values, and they encourage you to see faith as a virtue. They encourage you to be loyal to your beliefs. You should not be loyal to your beliefs. You should act according to what you believe, but you shouldn't be loyal to your beliefs. Your beliefs are your map of the world.
Yeah.
Right? There's the map and the territory. There's the belief and there's the world. And your beliefs are about the world, just like a map is about the territory. You shouldn't be loyal to your map. If your map fails you, you need to correct your map.
Right.
You shouldn't insist, well, no, the map says there's a lake here. By goodness, we're just going to keep going. Right? And no, you should in fact have no loyalty to your beliefs. And the discourse of faith is one that encourages people to be loyal to their beliefs and to devalorize rationality, skepticism. It lowers in their index of priorities the importance of evidence and good reasoning.
Right.
And as a consequence, people end up believing preposterous things. And so religion, in a way, is much worse than mental illness. And I don't want anyone to think for a moment that that I'm suggesting that religion is a mental illness. I wholeheartedly disagree with the people who say that. But in a way, it's worse because what religions allow to happen is for sane people to believe what only a crazy person would otherwise believe.
Right.
And allows perfectly sane, otherwise rationally functioning people to believe the things that a crazy person would believe, to believe absolutely fantastical stories that look for all the world like fables.
That's wonderfully said.
And to make huge metaphysically extravagant claims born of no evidence whatsoever,
Right.
or the weakest of arguments, right? And so, in a way, religions simulate madness, which is why I think for many people, religions, the religions of other people, even if you're religious yourself, the religions of other people always look crazy.
Yeah.
They sound like they're going on sort of in some kind of delusional rant when they talk about their religions. And I think the reason that is that religions encourage you to uncouple your beliefs from reasons and evidence, and they encourage you to be loyal to your beliefs in the very face of contrary evidence and argumentation. And that is basically simulating irrationality and madness. And so that, I think, is what's so pernicious about religions. Even when the religions aren't actually harming anybody else, you've got people walking around with a false picture of reality, wasting their lives believing falsehoods that they otherwise would never believe.
Right.
And this is a huge liability, and we shouldn't be content to let people just wallow in error and ignorance if really just a little bit of conversational pressure might shake them out of it over time.
And
Right.
people will, the scary thing is people will fight to the death for that.
Right.
It's
when that one facet of their lives tries to dictate the way everybody else operates. that then you're dealing with, for those purposes, an insane person. So in other words, if you're going to base the laws of the land on your wacky views, you may otherwise be a sane person, but you're trying to force insanity on the rest of the people that don't share your views.
Yeah, and I think the problem is worse than just enforcing your views on people. I mean, it's absolutely true that we want to oppose people who want to impose their views on us, right? Nobody likes to have another person's extravagant religious views imposed on them. I don't want to be told that I have to respect the Bible and that I can't draw a picture of Muhammad or whatever. I don't want to be forced to bow and scrape and pray in public and stuff like that. I don't want to have to be put through any of that stuff that strikes me as nonsense. I should be allowed to speak my mind. And so it's of course an imposition when people try to, bring prayer into schools and stuff like that. It's a nuisance. And it's of course worrisome when people are willing to kill other people.
That's the part.
Their religion. That's terrifying, but it doesn't have to be that bad before you object, right? Like a lot of people say, well, I'll only object to religion to the extent that people are murderous or something like that, or they're trying to cram it down my throat, right? But listen, if you have a friend who believes a falsehood, if you had a friend who believed a pyramid scheme, okay, and he's going to impoverish himself over this, okay, because he's throwing money into a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
Okay?
You warn him.
Right. You'd warn him. You wouldn't just let him walk off a cliff, right? And a person doesn't have to walk off a cliff before you say, hey, you're going the wrong way. If you had a friend who thought he was making progress getting somewhere, but you saw that he was in fact walking in a tight little circle, he was looking down at a map and insisting, no, I'm getting there, and you can see, dude, you're walking in a 10-foot radius here. You're not getting anywhere. You would say, hey, I think there's something wrong with your map. Take a look at mine, right? You need to reevaluate.
Yeah,
your beliefs, right?
you want to help them, and that's the whole. Then there's the other argument on top of that where they just sit there and go, "Well, where'd you get your morals from?"
Right.
They throw that on, Oz. They throw that on just to derail the conversation, which I just did.
Well, that I actually think is a good question that they ask, though, because they see their morals as coming from their religion,
right?
And people who think this way typically have only ever thought of morality within the context of their religion. And so when you propose that there needn't be any religion, they're wondering where the hell could morality come from,
right?
Because they have no, as far as they're concerned, God is an essential ingredient in the machinery of any kind of moral calculus,
right?
In any kind of moral evaluation. And you're taking out like the main gear out of the machinery of moral reasoning. And so they're wondering, how could you possibly engage in moral reasoning without it? You're just taking the gear out of the machine here that makes everything roll, right? Yeah. And that's a lack of imagination on their part, a failure to understand that morality can, in fact, be grounded in something else other than a God.
Yeah.
You just have to take a philosophy course, take a course in ethics to get examples of this. But I understand why they do that. They think that morality lies wholly within the province of religion.
Well,
and so they are honestly puzzled how you can be moral without religion.
It takes a lot of work out of it, doesn't it? Like I thought your video on that particular subject was great because it presented both sides very clearly, and the way you laid it out, it makes it very clear that it's not easy making decisions about what's right and what's wrong when you don't have some crazy book that you can look at, or something that you were taught, or something that was forced into you from birth to tell you what's right and what's wrong. You have to actually make decisions based on past experience, gut feeling, if you will, for lack of a better word, what's best for everybody involved, rather than just have it, spelled out for you. You can just,
But I think
that's it. I'm done.
I think it's where it's your, it's of course where you're born. But if you're, like, I was brought up Catholic, it wasn't like a closed community, but you had your own community of people. So, they were like, that boy over there is Jewish. Oh, okay, whatever, he's Jewish, but you don't hang out with them. It wasn't like today, where you could get in a car and somebody's African American and another guy could be Buddhist, and you meet all these different people and you listen to their points of view of the world. and you realize that your point is very narrow-minded. If you think your way is just the right way, you realize, hey, the other people have other ridiculous believing, because you used to think, well, they're crazy.
Yeah.
Then you listen to different people, and they all full-heartedly either, they believe it, or they just kind of tell you their story, and you kind of go, okay, that's how you were brought up. Okay,
yeah, and I think that's why the Catholic schools, they're very begrudgingly allowing in religion class to talk about other religions, because as soon as you hear, it's like Oz said, as soon as you see somebody else's point of view, you start to maybe look in the mirror and say, holy crap, this is what I'm doing.
I see it like Playboy. Playboy is no longer showing nudes because there's no point. You could go on any computer and type in hello, and a pair of tits will show up on the screen. Okay? So Playboy has just said, you know what, we cannot deal with, there's no point in just, now people are really going to buy it just for the articles. Okay? It's the same thing with religion, where I never had the internet when I was, a young man. You did, but it took forever to, so the last, 15, 20 years, you could type in whatever you want. You could watch, one of the reasons I've changed my views totally was an R&R Raw, Christopher Hitchens, where you watch what they have to say. And the same thing with the Great Debate on the Magic Sandwich Show, where you watch guys talk and you sit there and go, well, you know what? I never saw it like that, but yeah, I agree with them. It just, your mind was so closed. And I think with the Islam, especially in those Middle Eastern countries, they make sure, unlike the Catholic Church, that it stays closed. We don't allow that stuff into our, we won't talk about any other religion but our religion, or if we do talk about other religions, we talk about how wrong they are, how wrong they have it, and we have it all right. And it's an ideology that we in the North America and Europe, we figured it out, where we said, no, we should learn other things, and it's up to the individual to say, yes, I totally believe, or no, I don't. I've gone to school where a guy wanted to be a priest, and after a couple of years seeing the world, he's like, nah, I don't think so.
What was there a turning point for you, Oz, or was it a gradual process? You were saying you're a fundamentalist. That's complete opposite end of the spectrum. So what was it for you, or was it a real gradual thing?
Marijuana.
And no, marijuana played no part in it. Drugs play a negligible part in my life.
But not zero.
And no, not zero. There was a time where I dabbled a little bit, but very little. I have other vices. I guess it was gradual, but it happened when I was young, and it happened fairly rapidly. I grew up in a household where we were almost Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother was always on the cusp, was always just about to get baptized, but she could never quite take the plunge, to pardon the pun. So we were growing up. We were indoctrinated with this. We grew up with the New World Translations version of the Bible. We grew up with all of the Jehovah's Witness literature. The pamphlets and booklets like Awake and the Watchtower and all that stuff. That was the theology that I grew up in. The first book that I can remember reading, an actual book, like a hardcover book, was a very quaint, sweet little. I have fond memories of it, actually. This little book of Bible stories called "Listening to the Great Teacher." These are all stories about Jesus. They're all very charming stories about Jesus, with good moral lessons in them and stuff like that. And another book I read in my very early teens was "Did Man Get Here by Evolution or by Creation?" Another Jehovah's Witness publication, and at the time that was the most widely read anti-evolution tract in the world. It was the most widely published and translated book for a long time on that subject.
So it must be real.
I absolutely believed it, and I used to go and argue with my teachers in school against evolution and stuff like that. But around the age of 16 or so, things started to fall apart for me religiously. I had started having grave doubts, and it was because I had a very sort of natural instinct in the natural world and the sciences. I was a stargazer. I still love astronomy. I was into dinosaurs and things like that. And my parents were always encouraging me to read and study. And, you know, they would get me chemistry sets and microscopes and telescopes to just sort of encourage this curiosity I had about the natural world.
Great. So they were confusing you more.
And, well, I mean, they didn't realize, I mean, my mother anyway, I lived with my mother, my parents were separated. You know, she couldn't have realized or anticipated that this would be corrosive of my religious views, because of course, if you're interested in astronomy,
right,
and you're interested in dinosaurs and geology, of course you're going to be confronted with all of the evidence for an old universe and an old Earth.
Right.
And then eventually the evidence for evolution, and so everything started to fall apart. I started having grave misgivings. So it started with that. And then there were other things that happened. I had sort of moral questions and stuff like that. And so by the time I was about 17 and I went to Cégep, because I grew up in rural Quebec, and in Quebec you go to high school until grade 11, then you go to Cégep, which is kind of like university, but like junior university, you know, it's like,
right.
When I was there, I was no longer at home. I moved out. I was in the city living in an apartment. And so when that happened, like, I was sort of away from the pressure that I would have felt at home. I was sort of free to think on my own. And then I ended up taking a philosophy course and a psychology course and a course on Greek mythology and Homer and stuff like that. And I remember reading some existentialism. And so all of a sudden I was exposed to these new ideas, and I was no longer sort of under any pressure back home. So it was very rapid for me. It happened gradually, but it all happened in about a year and a half. So that by the time I was about 17 and a half or 18, I was actually calling myself an atheist. I was of the view that it was nonsense. But there were phases in there where I was agnostic. There were phases in there where I was deist, and I flipped back and forth between these things until finally I realized, you know what, I just think there's no God.
Right.
You know.
When you say you're not agnostic,
well, I'm an atheist now, but I was agnostic.
You were agnostic. And why do a lot of people think agnostics are either wimps or they're like just
sitting on the fence?
Yeah, sitting on the fence.
Well, for a number of reasons. Some people, I think, really are just playing hide the ball. They are atheists, but they don't want to call themselves atheists because there's a stigma to it, and they know that if they say, "Hey, I think there's no God," someone's going to say, "Well, what are your reasons for thinking?" Hide the ball. They are atheists, but they don't want to call themselves atheists because there's a stigma to it, and they know that if they say, "Hey, I think there's no God," someone's going to say, "Well, what are your reasons for thinking there's no God?" And just like most people don't have good reasons for thinking there's a God, a lot of people don't have good reasons for thinking there's no God. That is, they might have good reasons, but they can't articulate them, or maybe they don't have good reasons at all. So a lot of people just want to sort of take what they think is a softer position that they think has a lesser burden or no burden.
Now,
but I think actually an agnostic, depending on the kind of agnostic you are, does have a burden. If you're the kind of person who is literally on the fence because you are unconvinced either way, you're not convinced that theism is true, and you're not convinced that atheism is true. You're not convinced there's no God, and you're not convinced there is a God. You're just, I don't know which is true. I can see merits in both arguments for and against for both sides, right? That's a rational position to be in. If by your lights the case for one or the other has not been made sufficiently to warrant any confidence from you, then on the fence is exactly where you ought to be.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think of it as on the fence. I think of it as I'm on the wall.
Right.
Okay. And I haven't heard a reason one way or the other to push me one way or the other, and neither position is true by default.
So at least it's
right?
honest. It's an honest position.
Yeah. Now, but that's not to say that everyone who holds that position is honest. Some people really are just dishonest. They're just,
right.
Like Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, is a bullshitter. He is an atheist.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't want to call himself that for PR reasons.
Bad for business.
I can respect why
his mom would beat the shit out of him.
Well, I can respect that it would hurt him professionally in his capacity as a purveyor of science. Because a lot of people, especially in an American context, are so opposed to atheism that if they hear him call himself an atheist, they'll dismiss him, right? But I think that he is, in fact, just flat out lying. He's an atheist, and he knows it, and he just doesn't want to call himself that.
It is kind of insulting, especially when you watch the show Cosmos. I mean, it goes right to the precipice of saying God's not real on the show. Like if you've watched the show, I mean, it's and even his tone when he talks about the way or not ancient, but historical scientists have been treated by religion and stuff like that. It's glaringly obvious that the guy doesn't believe, and it is kind of an insult, I think, to say, yeah, geez, I don't know. I don't know because I'm a scientist.
Well, he
and I
always
have to
kind
have
of
proof.
has some weird, like he always goes, well, let's get past that, or he'll always just, like dismiss it, right? He doesn't want to come out and say, yes, I am an atheist, of course. And I could see, that would piss off a lot of people in the atheist community.
There's another kind of agnostic I should make mention of here, though. There's a Huxleyan agnostic. Thomas Henry Huxley is the fellow who's a contemporary of Darwin's, who in the 1850s actually coined the word agnostic. And what he meant by agnostic is not someone who merely is undecided on the question, can't make up their minds, but it's someone who's made up their minds in a different way. It's someone who's made up his or her mind that the question is unanswerable. That's different from saying, I don't have an answer to the question. If I say I don't know the answer to the question, that's different than saying the question cannot be answered by anyone ever.
That feels
Huxleyan agnostic is actually making a fairly strong claim. The Huxleyan agnostic is saying, the reason I don't believe there's a God and I don't believe there's no God is because nobody could ever be in a position to rationally justify either position. The Huxleyan agnostic thinks that theism and atheism are both irrational, that nobody is warranted in being an atheist or a theist. That is actually a fairly strong position, and that is a position that requires quite a bit of justification, I think, if you're going to make that case.
It feels like a cop-out.
So that's another kind of agnostic.
What do you were talking about when you were in university there in Quebec, and what do you make of the controversy, particularly in the U.S., but it's happening here too, about trigger warnings and students wanting to be protected from facts as they're presented, or information as it's presented in a university setting?
I have no patience for that. When I was in university, in Montreal, I went to a liberal arts college, and it was what I mean by liberal arts college is it was a great works curriculum. You start with the Bible and the Epic of Gilgamesh, and you work your way through as many of the great works of literature as you can in 3 years, right, up to the contemporary period. So you're reading all of the classics in history, philosophy, science, art history, music. It's it tries to be a classical education. So that was my background. But that has a tendency to be a fairly conservative kind of educational program, because you're reading sort of the greatest that has been thought and said in the history of Western civilization, and a lot of people take a dim view of that. A lot of people on the left, and I self-identify as a leftist and a liberal, but a lot of people on the left think that this is somehow the education of that protects and preserves and sustains the status quo, right? Because it's mostly a literature. This curriculum is mostly literature written by dead white European males, right? And dwems, as they used to call them. So when I was a student at the time, there was this active storm over the university, this culture war. A lot of people were trying to dismantle this kind of curriculum and say that it was pernicious, that it preserves the status quo, and there was a lot of this sort of social justice warrior mentality that we see now operative then. In fact, I really see it as an extension of what I saw in the late 80s and early 90s. This effort to stifle debate and to condemn certain views as acting in service of the status quo and preserving power for certain groups. And so, and there was this tendency to want to insulate people from anything that would be offensive to them. And I think that a university should be the opposite of that.
Right.
A university should be the place where you go and you have your ideas challenged.
Yeah.
Okay? And not just the ideas of the status quo, but your own liberal progressive ideas should get challenged there too.
Right.
And so if you're going to university and you think you have a right not to be offended, you really have walked into the wrong kind of institution.
Right.
That's what universities are for. Universities should be the final place in our culture where people can discuss ideas that are absolutely terrifying and odious.
Right.
That's where you should be able to rationally discuss ideas
Right.
like feminism, but also men's rights, like Islam and homophobia and homosexuality, but also white supremacy. These ideas should not be suppressed. That's where they should be discussed, because that's where they can be exposed if they're BS. That's where people will learn how to debunk bad ideas. You
Right.
don't learn how to debunk bad ideas by insulating yourself from even hearing them.
Right.
Yeah.
You're if you stand still, you're effectively moving backwards.
Well, you've pretty much made yourself a useless person, because if you go out in the real world, you will get the shit knocked out of you. You've went to school for nothing for 4 years or 5 years.
Folks,
Well, as they see it, this project will not end. It will not end in university. You will not in the workplace be allowed to say certain things. You will not be allowed in a pub to say anything. The idea is, their aim is broader than that. They want it such that everything is like the N word. You can never say the word nigger, right? You got to say the N word. You can never say certain words that will trigger a person and upset a person and offend a person, right?
Yeah.
And the university is just a place where these people are highly active and are able to make inroads. But if they had their way, there would be no place where you wouldn't be where you could say these things and not be called a bigot, right?
right.
And I don't want to live in that world. And I think the university is the last place where this should take hold. And here it is, the first place where it's taking hold. So I find that really quite terrifying, because if the place that should be the absolute standard of openness and freedom of speech and freedom of thought and expression and open criticism, if that is the place where it cannot happen, then it won't be able to happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly. Folks, we're here talking to Ozymandias Ramses II. How was that? Was that good?
Yeah, I liked it.
That was perfect.
It's better than mine. Jesus, thanks for making me look like an idiot.
He's a smart cookie and all-around nice guy, and we're talking religion, and this has been great.
Yeah, he's always on the he does the Great Debate, and he's on the Magic Sandwich show a lot. Is it DPR Jones on the show?
Yeah, DPR Jones is the creator and the host and moderator of the show.
Yeah, he does a good job.
Thunderfoot is also present sometimes, although less so lately. Aaron Raw, the Hogtie Champ, Concordance, and there's a few other recurring panelists.
Yeah, DPR needs to stop smoking. Tell him we're worried. Tell him to quit.
I'll pass it along.
Yeah, because it's not good. I know when he's talking, he smokes, and I just think, oh fuck, he's gonna get sick. We're gonna play a little game. It's called Parts of the Bible That Make No Sense. Okay.
Oh dear.
So.
It's not that long a show.
No, trust me. Look who you're talking to, Oz. You have no fucking. Trust me. This is kindergarten for you, pal. Okay. They built the Tower of Babel, right? And that pissed off God, right? God did not like that. But the space station is okay. Like, don't people find that? Isn't that weird? Like, God would kind of, like, people believe, oh, you should never try and reach God.
He makes a pretty big concession there. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, you know what? Screw it.
It's all right.
It's all right. We'll let that go.
I guess the apologetical reply, I always try to see these things from the other side if I can. I guess the apologetical reply would be that, well, God's already taken care of that problem of man overreaching and trying to aspire to the divine. He's already scattered people all over the world and got them speaking different languages and stuff like that. His point was made and he achieved his objective, and so that we'll never be able to make that mistake again, even if we build a space station.
Huh.
That was good.
I'm sold.
Done.
All right.
And then here's... Now, we're going to get a little deeper. Killing babies in the Bible. Why do people say it's okay when it happened, when it happened a few times in the Bible where God said, go kill the baby, go kill what was it? There was a big battle. The Amalekites.
Yeah.
They kind of had it coming.
Yeah, but the thought of, I always say this, me saying, hey, did you see the news? Yeah, I saw the news. They raped a kid on the news. This guy got charged for raping a kid, and you're like, oh, that's awful. Now, if I showed you a video of it, it would be 10 times worse. You would realize, oh shit, this is awful. This is disgusting. This is, it hits so much harder. Now, to kill a baby, I mean, as a soldier, if you were ordered to kill a child, if God was so powerful, why couldn't he just take the soul out of the kid? Like, why do I have to kill it? Why do I have to do the act?
Well, I mean, if God took the soul out of the kid, then it doesn't matter, presumably, if you killed it, right? Because according to these people, the soul is what gives life its value, and the fact that the soul is created in the image of God. So if God were to just sort of poof, I mean, you've just given them an apologetic answer there, right? If God just, turned them into zombies, took their souls away off to heaven or something like that, then it doesn't matter what you do. It's just meat, right?
He's good at this. He's good at this game.
What's funny about that story is that...
Damn it, I thought I had him.
What's funny about this is if you talk to a person who is a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or anyone who believes the stories in the Old Testament but are not particularly familiar with them, and they don't know the story of Amalek and the Amalekites and what happened in the conflict with the Hebrews, or what's not necessarily what happened, because I don't think that story happened, but the story that's described in the Bible, I think that's in Genesis and Chronicles or something like that. If you read that, if you ask them hypothetically, what if God were to say, listen, I want you to kill all these people, I want you to kill their cattle, and I want you to kill all the men, women, and children, and even the pregnant mothers and stuff like that, newborn babes, I want you to kill them all, right? If they haven't heard this story, they'll blanch and they'll go, what are you talking about? No, God would never command such a thing. And then you show them the passage, and then they go, oh, and then you can see the cognitive dissonance on their faces, right? Most people who believe in God and believe that God is good think that this act is unthinkable and inexcusable and would not be in the Bible until you show it to them. And then, now they've got a problem. They take this book to be inspired by God, and they want to organize their lives around this book, even if they haven't read much of it. And so they then have to confect some justification for how this could be permissible. So then they have to invent, all kinds of reasons why this would have been fine. Well, it would have been worse for the babies if they'd been allowed to live. They would have been made slaves or something like that. And so they have to sort of come up with justifications after the fact for why it was actually more merciful to just, massacre infants and pregnant mothers and all the rest of it. I mean, but you have the same problem in the story of Noah's Ark. I mean, all these people get killed. All these animals get killed. I mean, every living thing except what's on the ark gets virtually wiped out.
Can you imagine the smell on that boat? Ooh. I would just, I couldn't, I'd be like, no, I can't.
Really? And then all humans came from the humans on the boat. I wouldn't get anywhere near that after 40 days and 40 nights out there. That's gross.
Yeah. And then I'd rather be in a giant fish's stomach.
Yeah.
For like 3 days at least.
Like Job, yeah.
But yeah, it's stuff like that but it's the act that I just don't like. It's where, this is what worries me. If you were a soldier, and they said, well, go kill, God said it's okay, you need to go kill those babies, I would, or innocent people, or pregnant mothers, or I would say, well, like, why can't he do that himself? What's he need me? I don't want to do that.
Yeah. That story was written in a context when that's exactly the kind of thing that often did go on, right? I mean, in antiquity, you didn't hide the bodies, right? Like nowadays, if there's a genocide, you hide the bodies, you deny the truth, you suppress it, you bury the bodies, you bulldoze over the evidence and stuff like that, so that no one knows that it happened. In antiquity, when you wiped out your enemies, what you did is you piled up their bones as high as you could, so that everyone could see that you were capable of such a thing, right?
Right. You were kind of proud of it. You were like, look, come on.
Yeah, and that's what you're seeing in that story. It's relating a tale of conquest, and it's saying, just look how kick-ass and badass we were. And by the way, we were mandated by God to do this thing, and so we were able to do it, right? There's no, I mean, I don't think that anything like this actually went down in that particular instance. I think that this story is a fiction. It's a fictive history. It's not actually what took place. But nevertheless, the reason that story is there is because by the standards of the time, that was not considered odious. It was acceptable to massacre your enemies right down to the last living thing, including their cattle, right? including their livestock.
Yeah.
So that what you're seeing here is like a fossil. Here is a piece of what morality looked like in the ancient world, right? I mean, even if it didn't actually go down that way, the fact that they could boast about this and say that this would have been a good thing,
right,
tells you something about how they viewed morality, which is just to say that the Bible is a repository. I mean, it's like a time machine. You get to go back and see how people used to think, what they used to value. And if you look at the God that they value, they're valuing something close to like a Zeus-like being who is afraid and jealous and plays favorites and is wrathful and vengeful and petty.
Yeah. Knocked up some chick named Mary.
Yeah.
And, well, that's later. But, I mean, you can actually sort of see the evolution of the God concept in the West in the Bible. It starts off with this Zeus-like God in the Garden of Eden who's walking around in there, talking to them, asking them questions, gets annoyed that they lied to him, gets annoyed that they now have knowledge and that they are poised to live forever. And he has to evacuate them from the garden, and he has to set up cherubs with flaming swords so they can't find their way back in and eat of the tree of life and be immortal. It even says, behold, the man and the woman have become as one of us, knowing good and evil, right? And now, lest they put forth the tree of life and eat of that, like he's worried about usurpation. This is like a Zeus-like God, right? And later on, that God grows. Their conception of God gets magnified. It gets closer and closer to the God of the philosophers, a more abstract being who is unassailable and cannot be hurt. But the God that you see in those early stories is a petty God, a Zeus-like God, right? So I love reading the Bible. I find it interesting. It's like you're doing ancient archaeology when you read the Bible, right? You're finding out about what people used to think, even if it didn't go down that way. You're finding out what they valued, right? And that to me is intrinsically interesting as anthropology and as history.
Man, he knows his shit.
Yeah.
I wish I smoked a joint earlier, because this would have been one of those moments where you just go, I
don't know. You had enough trouble with the name.
You know so much that it's. I could see why the place and the Magic Sandwich Show and the Great Debate would want to have you on there. You really know your stuff, and you back it up. You just don't spew shit. You actually can back it up with facts, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, I'm gonna listen to this a few times and think, wow, I fucked up huge. So here's another one that to show how petty, how like when God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Like, why would a God, like if he made both of us, are we pets or something? Where
Seems counterproductive.
Like he put one against the other. He made Pharaoh angry. He took away his firstborn. He made it rain frogs, and he did all these horrible things to Pharaoh to make him go after the Jews. And if he knew what was going to happen, he knew that people were going to die a horrible death, and so it's very it's like, to me it's a part in the Bible where it's like God shows that, like, is he playing games with humans? I mean, if you really think about it, is he treating us like pawns? If to make somebody angry, and did he not love Pharaoh too? Pharaoh was supposedly something he made. Why would he do such a? That's something I could see a mean God would do, not a good God.
Well, I think in that story you're seeing this God that plays favorites because he's one God among many. Like if you look at Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is actually a later text. And Deuteronomy is the book that contains the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments, right at the top of these commandments is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Not, there are no other gods, I'm the only God there is to worship, but you shall have no other gods before me. Right? That's not telling you that there are no other gods to believe in. That's telling you, listen, those other gods, I don't want you worshiping them. And the reason that it's written that way is because at that stage, monotheism was not in place. There was no monotheism at the time that these stories were being written. What there was monolatry, the worship, the insistence that one worship one God among the many competing gods of the various cultures, right? Yahweh was one God that was worshipped in antiquity. And the people who worship Yahweh didn't even, I don't think, believe that he was the only God. I mean, he apparently had a wife, Asherah, and there were other gods that are mentioned. There are other supernatural beings. If you read the Genesis account and the creation account, God is talking about, look, behold, the man and the woman have become as we, as one of us. And like he's talking to people. He's talking to the hosts of heaven. They believed in antiquity that Yahweh was one of many gods, but he was their God. It's like having a patron saint. This is the one that we worship. This is the one who's going to look after us. This is the one that made a deal with us, who's going to protect us and deliver us to the promised land, and we have a covenant with him. We have a deal with this God. We don't have a deal with the God. We have a deal with this God.
Right.
This is a monolatrous, not a monotheistic culture, but a monolatrous.
I never thought of it that way.
So it's like they believe in the worship of only this one God. That eventually changes into monotheism later. I mean, you look at the books of Ezra and what happens later on, the idol smashing and all that. That changes. They come to think of this God as the only God and all the other gods as false gods. But in those early books, you're actually seeing a record of there being many gods and only this God is our God. Right, we are beholden to him. He's playing favorites with us. Right, we're his chosen people. Right, the Egyptians are not the chosen people. They have their own gods. I mean, Moses and the sorcerer Pharaoh. They have this little magical gunfight. Right, where whose serpent can eat whose serpent, and magical sticks into snakes and stuff like this. This is a world that is fantastical. That's populated with all kinds of sorcery and magic, and the way that you prove that your God is the better God, not the true God, the better God, the more powerful God.
See,
right? The God you need to look out for is that my God has more powerful juju than your God. Right. That's what's going on in those kinds of stories. And so when you read of Yahweh hardening the heart of Pharaoh, I mean, this is just our God is messing up your guy, right? And you're just at his mercy, and look what he can do,
Yeah.
So I think that's what's going on there. And the same thing with the plagues. I mean, this is the best that God can do. He's got to throw plagues at people. I mean, presumably there's all kinds of people, innocent Egyptians who are being made to suffer because of Pharaoh. I mean, even if Pharaoh's heart was hardened without divine assistance, it wouldn't matter, right? Those people are suffering for no reason. So they just had a different conception of morality. And this is an interesting thing that it's hard for us to imagine, because we now think of a God as being the one God who governs over all of us, who's concerned for all of his creatures, and so he shouldn't be immoral, he shouldn't choose sides. That was not the view in the ancient world of paganism and polytheistic gods. I mean, if you read the Iliad, right, the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War, and what happens there when the Greeks go to Troy and to battle and to try to conquer Troy, and they're fighting outside the walls. And you look at the descriptions of the battles, and the Olympian gods of the Greeks are taking sides, literally taking sides. They literally materialize and appear on the battlefield to distract people so that the guy on their team can kill the guy on the other team for them, right? I mean, and to the Greeks, this didn't take away from a hero. If your hero kills a guy from another nation, and he does it with divine assistance, that doesn't take anything away from the hero. That shows how great he is.
Right.
That he got this divine assistance. We don't think this way about gods anymore, but they did in the ancient world, and that's why those stories are there. That's what you're seeing in these stories.
Right.
You're not seeing the same Yahweh at all. Right. This is a different conception of God, a more primitive conception of God than the conception of God that is described in the New Testament, for instance, right? Which is a much grander God.
Jeez, that's amazing. Because it sort of explains the whole. Here's Jesus. I'm going to put him on Earth for a while, and it breaks the connection between a mortal person and God. So it separates the two. So I've never really thought about it like that. So a Greek hero is aided by Zeus. And that's just normal. Or say the Pharaoh is like next in line to God. He's not human and he's not God, but he's in between.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes the separation there, and that never really occurred to me before.
Yeah, I think the Bible makes so much more sense when you look at it from the standpoint of archaeology and cultural anthropology. When you realize that what you're looking at in the Bible is an evolving concept of God, a changing concept of God. So many of the contradictions in the nature of God evaporate when you realize, well, no, people have just changed their minds over time about what God was like, right? The difficulty is if you're an apologist, now you have to make sense of those old stories, right? You have to imagine that God is this abstract being and he is all good and he is all truth. Yeah, but what about all the old stories where he's jealous and vengeful and wrathful and behaves petty and seems to be afraid of usurpation? What about the times when he hardens people's hearts, where he deludes people and deceives people, right? Wait a minute, this doesn't square with this more rarefied God of the philosophers that you want to point to now. That it's a hard job for apologists, right? They have to bend over backwards to come up with apologetics that try to make it seem as if we've always been talking about the same God.
Yeah.
Right? Those problems disappear when you realize this is not the same God. This is an evolving concept of God.
Right. And it's totally influenced by people.
Right. Yeah.
And here's the thing.
People's ideas change. Yeah.
And here's the thing. I think it was Michael Shermer. I'm not as usual. I fuck up what people write, so or say. But I loved it when he said, "So God killed himself, like for us to show how much He loved us." Like, like God's coming down, so He came to a backward society, out in the middle of, he didn't go to China where they could do math. He showed up in the desert, came from a virgin, and he killed himself to save us.
Right.
If it was a God, in other words, if it was a God, He couldn't even suffer. I mean, it would be like a fake kind of suffering. If He's that powerful, you're talking about a being that created the heavens and earth.
Yeah. Well, what's 3 days in a tomb if you're immortal?
What's a nail through the fucking wrist? What's that? I mean, that's. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I mean, their answer to that would be that, this is a triune God. There's a Trinity involved here. God is three persons.
Yeah, never got that.
Being. Yeah, well, it doesn't make sense. I mean, it is understood explicitly as a mystery, so you shouldn't try too hard to understand it. I mean, but even Catholics who sort of first came up with this doctrine will tell you that it's a mystery, right? So.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, how can there be three persons in one being? We don't know. But let's put that aside for the moment, right? As they see it, Jesus was a man and a mortal man, and he could suffer. And he could suffer as exquisitely as you can suffer, right? So, I mean, so the idea is God, in his capacity as a mortal human, as one person of the Trinity, comes down to earth, is incarnated, and suffers a horrible, humiliating death, an agonizing death, and that's supposed to be a sacrifice. Now, why this God needs sacrifice? I mean, it tells you something, right? This was a religion at the time that still believed in animal sacrifice. I mean, there were still literally temple sacrifices going on in Solomon's temple at this time. This is why this religion is sort of bent on a blood sacrifice, right? They still believe in blood sacrifice. They still think that God wants blood, right? Why? I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense if God is as magnificent as they imagine. But nevertheless, they're positing that God can be his thirst for justice and retribution can be satisfied by the massacre of an innocent, right? I mean, that's kind of a weird religion. Yeah. That is a weird theological claim, right? But it's even weirder than that when you think about it, because there's I don't know who said it first, but someone once described Christianity as that religion where God sacrifices himself to prevent himself from carrying out a punishment he himself imposed and he himself thinks is just.
Yeah.
That was Michael Shermer.
Yeah, is that who said it first?
Yeah.
I don't know who said it first.
I think it was Michael Shermer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Now, there are theological arguments that you can use.
Maybe he got it from somebody else. I think he got it from me. But that's when I heard him say that, he was saying that on a debate, and it just stopped me dead on my tracks. I'm like, yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of, that is the most like even Charles Manson would go, whoa, I could never do, I couldn't be that evil, you know. I mean, how that is a mind fuck onto itself to say you in other words, you hurt yourself to show how much you love us. Why couldn't you just help us? Like, we're wiping our ass with palm trees here, for God's sakes. Give us toilet paper. Help us.
They believe in collective guilt and innocence in the ancient world, and they believe in vicarious punishment and justice, right? So they believe, for instance, that if a person does something that offends God, the punishment will be visited upon that person and his offspring for like 7 generations and stuff like that, right? I mean, this was a value in the ancient world, right? This was a way of meting out punishment. Like, oh, I'm going to make you suffer. I'm not just going to make you suffer. I'm going to make your kids suffer. And now today, to our modern sensibilities, wait a minute. No, everyone is only responsible for their own actions, and you can't hold other people responsible for other people in that way, right? That's just wrong to hold other people accountable in that way, right? But in the ancient world, this was not a problem, right? So it's perfectly okay to punish other people, right? Literally people who are not yet born, for the sins of other people. I mean, I don't know why I'm suffering for what Adam and Eve allegedly did. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
But the idea that guilt can be inherited, right, is a notion that doesn't fly today.
Well,
the only reason it's around today is that people are beholden to these ancient books, where back in antiquity, that's what they believed. They believed in collective guilt and collective innocence. They believed in heritable guilt. And accountability. And they also believed in vicarious punishment, that another person can stand in for you and take your punishment for you.
Yeah, it sure helps keep people in line.
And then, of course, to our modern sensibilities, this makes no sense. This is absolutely unjust.
Yeah.
But that's why you can massacre an innocent guy, Jesus, in the story, and that's going to satisfy this God and his thirst for satisfaction, right?
But there's that Christopher Hitchens, one of my favorite speeches is where he says, where I could take, if you have debts, I could pay your debts if I'm nice enough.
Right.
Okay. And I could even take if you're going to the gallows, I could take your place on the gallows. But I can't take away, like, the shit that you've done,
Yeah. There's no undoing wrongdoing.
Right. And that is so true. That is the truth, I remember watching, what was it, Gangs of New York, where the guy hung himself for money for the family, to show, like, it was something political, for the, to show, hey, vote for this guy here. I'll kill myself and they'll pay for my family. They'll give my family money, and the kids are watching their father being hung, and he's like, "Don't worry, kids. You're going to get fed. You're going to get money." And I just thought that is fucking horrendous. That's just
but that's just a tragedy, though. I mean, if a person volunteers to do something, that's just a self-sacrifice. That is an amazing, I mean, I don't know the story, but as you've described it so far, it sounds like an amazing act of altruism and selfless care for one's loved ones, right? I'll literally destroy myself so that you'll be better off. That's a wonderful thing. And to the extent that Jesus is sacrificing himself for others, that's a wonderful part of the story. What's not wonderful is that God requires such a thing. This is the story not just of a person selflessly annihilating himself and torturing himself for the good of other people, to satisfy some tyrant. It's that you're also told you're supposed to worship the tyrant.
Right. So that's
requires it. That's what's so perverse about this story, and this is why I think this is why I think that Christianity actually promotes immoral values. I mean, I don't think there's any way to make sense of this, morally speaking. This is an immoral teaching. It debases us. This should not be the highest good, the greatest thing that's ever been done for humans.
Right.
This is a terrible thing that was required. And it doesn't matter if Jesus volunteered. God is the one that requires
Right.
this stupidity,
He's
this
the
injustice.
architect. Yeah, folks, we're talking to Ozymandias Ramses II. It's been fascinating. I mean, I've like to think that I've thought about this a lot, but I've still you give me a lot more to ponder. This has been great. I have one more question. It's a hypothetical. If we wiped out religion right now, it didn't exist. There was no concept of God or a superior being. If it was just gone from the earth, do you think it would start again?
Yes.
Why?
In a word, yes. Because I think that religion is actually very natural. I think that there are features of human psychology sorry, my wife is giggling in the background. She's, I think, watching a soccer game and chatting with someone about it. There are features of human psychology that led us to come up with religion in the first place.
Right.
I mean, I don't think our religions were delivered to us by gods and by evidence that there were gods. We came up with this on our own. Religions arise spontaneously all over the world. I mean, people are just naturally superstitious, right? I mean, people stop being religious unless they're good critical thinkers and are taught to be rational and to embrace scientific values and skepticism and acquire critical thinking skills. What ends up happening is they just embrace a lot of woo, right? So this is just in us. You can look at cargo cults. Religions just sort of arise quite spontaneously, practically in one generation, right?
Right.
But people are naturally superstitious. They are naturally inclined to read intentions into things. Animism, the view that this is a very sort of so-called primitive view of the world, of looking at the world and assuming that everything has a spirit, has a mind, has intentions, right?
Yeah.
We see faces in the clouds. We see intentions in everything.
Right.
You get pissed off at your car when it won't start. You start swearing at it. What are you doing? Right? Look, This is just what we do. You and I have this ability to read minds. Okay, and I mean this in a fairly literal sense. Okay, just look at what happens with people in a conversation, right? Two people are conversing, and what happens is, in order to have that conversation, you have to make predictions about what is going on in that person's head. You have to assume that they're seeing you. You have to assume that they're understanding your words. You have to assume that they understand the situation that they're in. You have to presume all kinds of beliefs on behalf of them so that you know what to say. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what the hell to say.
Right.
And that's why we can say things like, John believes that Sally thinks that Mary thought that June was jealous about David, and there's all this incredible, exquisite mind reading that goes on. Sometimes we're wrong, but we do it effortlessly. The machinery of attributing a mental life to another person is always operative. You do it for your dog. We have a tendency to over-interpret and over-ascribe thoughts and feelings and beliefs and ideas to animals, right?
My dog judges me all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a perfect example, actually. But so we do this all the time. The machinery of ascribing a mental life to other people is always operative, and
right.
we don't. It doesn't turn off. We do it when we're out in the world. We do it to the natural world. People have a tendency to see intentions and purposes and interests in the natural world.
It's a product of evolution that's been important in our development.
Right. So as a byproduct, we are disposed to simply assume that there's sort of a mind behind everything, right?
But
that there's purpose and intention behind everything. This is why we have animism and cargo cults and totemism and all of these things. So religions arise spontaneously. It's not like someone came up with the concept of God and out of that arose all these other descendant religions. No, religions arose and to this day arise spontaneously because we just are we're not born rational. See, here's a mistake that people think. People think that we are born not having beliefs, not being disposed to believe certain things. We're like a blank slate, and we acquire our beliefs strictly through evidence, and we're sort of fundamentally rational. And we're not. What we are is we are born credulists. We're not born critical thinkers. We learn critical thinking as painfully as we learn how to read and do arithmetic. Okay? We are born credulists. We are born believing whatever the hell we're told. And it has to be that way.
Right.
Right? Baby duck has to trust mommy duck. And so you drink in your picture of reality, no matter how fanciful and mythical it is, with your mother's milk. You just take it on trust, just as I did when I grew up. Okay,
Right.
but it's only through effort, like learning math and learning how to write and read painfully through deliberate effort over the course of a lifetime, that you become a skeptic and a critical thinker.
Right.
Right. So we are born credulous, and we have all this mental machinery that disposes us to be superstitious, to see intentions, to see faces in the clouds, right? All of this almost guarantees that religions and superstitions are going to arise all over the place, and that's exactly what we find.
Right.
So it's not like if we ever killed off religion, okay, we did it, it's gone. It's like some virus that's gone. No. This is not a virus. Okay, this is not. This is more like I don't know what to liken it to, but it's almost like living in a toxic environment where you're going to get the rash again. Okay, because it's not an infection. It's caused by some chemical in the environment or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's worse than that. It's genetic. It's in us.
Right.
We are a religion-making species, right? We will make false religions always, and the only antidote to that is education. You have to literally give people critical thinking skills, develop their critical faculties, so that they'll be able to see, oh, this is hogwash.
Right. And I wouldn't mind that, but some religions are crazier than others, where if you're Protestant or I guess Buddhist, you don't really blow yourself up or kill anybody. You just but you go to the other spectrum where you have an ISIS or fundamentalism, where people their goal is to kill themselves and kill as many people as possible for their beliefs. So it's the levels of religion. There are people out there. I've met Christians that drink and smoke, and I don't think they really believe in what they every Sunday they go to church, but they still I don't think they believe it, or they do, but they're not gonna hurt anybody for it. So there's levels to it, and I wish if there wasn't any religion, I wish it would just be not a violent one. And if it's something that whatever, if that makes you happy, whatever. But I do have a problem when you're out killing people for taking a machine gun into a street for your ridiculous beliefs.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's of course not only religion that promotes that kind of violence and aggression and imposition of beliefs on other people. I mean, people do this in the name of political ideologies as well. But what I think is particularly pernicious about religion is that it valorizes faith. It encourages people to be loyal to their existing beliefs. I mean, think of what church is. Think of what it is to go to church. Church is a kind of funny thing, right? What is going to church? When you go to church or temple or a mosque or something like that and listen to a sermon, right? What are you doing? You're not going there to get an education. What you're doing there is you're going there to be in the company of like-minded people, none of whom are going to ask a skeptical question and challenge the person giving the sermon. That doesn't go on, right?
Right.
You're going to go there to be in the company of like-minded people, only like-minded people, okay? To hear what you already believe, to be told what you already believe. You're going there to have your beliefs rehearsed and reinforced. This is church. Is all about belief maintenance and belief rehearsal and belief preservation, okay? And this is the very opposite of critical thinking. This is the very opposite of questioning things. I'm not someone who thinks that you need to sort of doubt everything, but you should question everything. You should even question the things that you don't doubt, right? And then you might actually come to doubt them as a result of questioning everything. So you can't doubt everything. That skepticism isn't doubting everything. Skepticism is questioning and interrogating everything, right? Including what you already take to be true. but it's not doubting. I can't feign doubt. I can't pretend to doubt what I'm absolutely confident of. And there are things about which I'm completely confident. And to say that I doubt them is just a lie. Skepticism isn't doubt, okay? Skepticism is questioning and interrogation. But the problem with the discourse of faith is it encourages people not to question. And it tries to give them easy answers when those questions arise. And it encourages people to ignore our epistemic norms of good reasoning and critical thinking. It tries to suppress that. And to the extent that it does encourage it at all, it encourages it in service of maintaining and preserving the dogmas, which is what apologetics is. Apologetics isn't open inquiry. It's inquiry in service of a conclusion. What arguments can we come up with to defend against certain objections? What arguments can we come up with in service of buttressing our existing dogmas, right? So this is putting reason on a leash, right? And saying you're only allowed to go in this direction, reason. You're not allowed to go in any other direction. Right. And that's what I see as wrong with the discourse of faith. That's worse than other sort of dogmas and ideological discourses. Is that the discourse of faith leaves you inclined to be dogmatic. It closes your mind. Right. It teaches you exactly how you ought not to think, and it encourages that. It valorizes that to a point that where some people will actually say, you just have to have faith, as if that were a virtue and not something to be embarrassed about. And
it's untestable. Whereas like a political ideology, okay, so say you think this one way, and then you elect this person, and you follow a certain route, and okay, that didn't work. It's a big mistake. I can change my mind. But with the religious ideology, there is no way to assess how it turned out.
Well, I mean, there is in principle. I mean, people find their way out of religions and change their minds about their religions precisely because they do exercise these faculties, and they do look into the facts, and they do see, hey, there are facts that contradict some of the historical claims. There are arguments that show that some of these attributes of God are inconsistent with one another, and that this God is an impossibility and stuff like that. So but the problem is that very often people will confect apologetics that try to make the God completely unfalsifiable, or try to work around the evidence in such a way as to disabuse people of their doubts.
So there is a reason why it happened, but we just don't understand it.
Well, that's another one. Yeah, I mean, an argument that a lot of people will use if you raise an objection to something, they'll say, well, look, it seems to me that God did this horrible thing. It's terrible. They'll say, well, God must have a reason why he did that. I just don't know what it is. Well, wait a minute. I mean, great. Maybe there's a reason why you can therefore imagine a reason why God did it that would make him evil too. I mean, if you're allowed to just imagine that there is some unspecified reason that would exculpate God, right? That would get him off the moral hook, right? That would turn what seems to be a bad act into a good act. If you're allowed to do that, great. Then I'm allowed to do the opposite and say, oh, well, I can imagine some horrible, unspecified motivation that God had for doing this that would make him evil, right? This is just hand waving when people do this, right? But they're doing that because they just are starting with the assumption that God couldn't do a bad thing. Right. And therefore, no matter what bad thing he appears to have done, as described in their sacred scriptures, or as you see in the world, for instance, when something horrible happens that a God could easily have prevented, they'll always insist, well, God has some higher reason that would get him off the hook. But look, says you, buddy. Yeah. Right? You're not giving me a reason. You're not even giving yourself a reason. You're starting with your conclusion that God is good, and therefore that this ultimately has to be a good action, right? A tsunami wipes out 250,000 people in another part of the world on Boxing Day, and there had to have been some reason why God permitted that, because God, after all, had the ability to prevent it. Right. If he didn't, it's because it would have been worse somehow not to. He had to let that happen. It's a morally better universe if he permits it, right? God would never actually allow an evil to happen if it would result in a greater evil. Ultimately, everything happens for the greater good and the glorification of God, which is the highest good. My goodness, you can say that about anything. Yeah. What that means is that this is the best of all possible worlds. Yeah. The world couldn't be any better, right? I mean, that's preposterous. The world can't be any better. Great. Well, we need to stop trying to improve things.
No point in steering now.
Well,
exactly.
I hope people that listen to this show, because I know exactly, I'm gonna, after listening to this, I'm gonna go get baptized.
Yeah.
That's the first thing
I can
doing.
do that for you, actually.
I'm walking into church and I'm going, I got it all. Oz, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to dummies. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, please ask us. There are so many questions we want to ask you.
Yeah, we're glad you ignored the premise that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah,
because you're clearly in the wrong room.
Yeah,
but we appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for making us look stupid.
Well, thanks. If you have further questions, I'd be happy to talk to you on some other occasion.
For sure. But I'm gonna instead of putting your name, I'm gonna put Ron Jeremy.
Yeah,
and then people are just gonna go, "What the fuck?
Wow,
I had no idea."
Ron.
You could see.
You'll get more listeners, that's for sure.
A lot of sick listeners. a lot of people going, "Who? I never really thought of it that way." Jeez, I thought it was okay. All right, Ron. You can listen to Oz on The Great Debate. He's a panelist on the Magic Sandwich Show. You could also see him on. There's also a good show called The Place. I want to thank you for taking the time.
Ozymandias Ramses II, everybody. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube. This will go up in a short time. Check it out. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things.
We'll put a link to the whatchamacallit, the video that I can't even do religious moderates provide cover for fundamentalism. I'll put that link up, and then people could see what I was trying to, they can see what there's so much more to religion than just, Jesus and Moses, and what Oz talks about is religion, how it affects us now, how it affected. I love how he can, take it from, hey, it affected people, 5,000 years ago. And it affects people differently today, and this is how we interpret it. And it's really, really cool stuff. Really smart man.
Anything else you want to plug, Oz, or anything?
No, not really. If anyone's interested in hearing more of what I have to say, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Ozymandias Ramses II. You can just check that out. I have a number of videos there. Most of the videos are me just sitting in a chair. They're kind of boring visually, I'm afraid. I'm kind of an old school vlogger. I just sit in a chair and talk.
You need to wear a Muscle Man shirt.
And, maybe scare a few people away. So I have videos of that sort. I also have some videos that are hangouts of discussions I've had with various people within the Great Debate community. And I also have a playlist that you can check out. Over 100 conversations I've had in hangouts and on other people's channels and other people's shows and stuff like that. So that's what I recommend if anyone's interested in hearing more of my thoughts.
Perfect.
Well,
check that out.
Thank you so much. We've had a rough week where we've lost, David Bowie. We've lost Lemming from Motorhead. We've lost Alan Rickman and Dan Haggerty. Man, I'm ending it on a high, aren't I? Horrible week, but what I like about these discussions is they make you think. They get you out of a box.
Live life right now.
Well, you know what? I think it's respect others, and if you don't understand something, do what I do. Ask.
Yeah.
Don't be scared.
There's no excuse anymore.
Ozzy's not that hard to find. You just ask him a question, and he will get back to you. He really enjoys explaining stuff, where I would just say, please leave me alone.
Yeah.
He actually will take his time, and he's very polite, very very calm individual. you know, and that means a lot. That's very cool that you would do that, Oz. It shows what kind of human being you are.
No, thanks very much. And, well, thank you both, actually, for the opportunity to talk to you and to get my ideas out there. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the plug of my channel. It's really gracious of you. Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem. You'll get about 2 people.
Yeah.
And
so
that's great. That's fine. I'll take it.
Folks, this has been the Wrecking Crew Comedy Podcast with me, Mark Arts, and
Vito D'Amico
and Ozymandias Ramses II. Have a great weekend.